Hi, everybody. The story I'm going to tell happened in 2019 and was experienced by my father, Oscar, who has worked for many years as a bus driver on rural routes near Tuxtla Gutierrez, Chiapas. My father has always been a very calm man, one of those who doesn't believe in ghosts or strange things. He always says that everything has an explanation and that people often get scared because they don't understand what they are seeing. But there was one night when something happened to him that to this day, he has not been able to explain in any way. We live on the outskirts of the city, in an area where the capital begins to blend with small towns and dark roads that connect rural communities. The route my father drove at that time went from Tuxtla to some communities near Rumbach, Chiapa de Corzo, passing through stretches where almost no one travels at night. That night, my father was on his last run of the day, around 10:30 or 11 p.m., and the bus was completely empty. He was tired because he had been driving since the morning, and all he wanted was to finish his shift and go home to rest. He told me that driving an empty bus at night feels quite strange because the whole vehicle is in silence. There are no passengers talking, no one getting on or off, no movement in the seats, only the sound of the engine and the wind hitting the windshield, and the tires rolling slowly along the asphalt of the road. Furthermore, there is a feeling of loneliness in the air, but at the same time, it feels as if you are being watched from somewhere. The route on that stretch is quite lonely. There are only trees, vacant lots, and from time to time, some isolated houses with a yellowish light on. The road has several curves, and there are parts where there aren't even any light poles. So, the only thing illuminating the path is the bus headlights. My father told me everything was normal until he reached a curve several kilometers before reaching the next town. When he turned that corner, the bus lights illuminated something that made him brake a little. My father says that on the side of the road there was a group of people. There were 9 young people standing together as if they were waiting for public transport. As he got a little closer, he could see they were young, high school students, some with backpacks and others in sweatshirts that looked like school uniforms. My father thought it was strange to see students there at that time of night, but he also knew that in the nearby towns, young people sometimes got stranded when they missed the last transport of the night, and that is why he had no problem stopping. Then he opened the bus door, and the youths began to board one by one. The strange thing, according to him, is that they didn't talk to each other, nor did they make the typical noise that students make when they get on a bus, that student buzz, so to speak. He says there was no laughter, no shoving, no jokes. They just boarded in silence and sat in different seats, staring out the windows. My father, trying to break the silence, asked them what they were doing there so late. One of the young men, who seemed to be the oldest of the group, answered in a very calm voice. He said they had come in a private car, but the vehicle had broken down on the road and wouldn't start anymore. My father told me that at that moment he thought something was strange because he hadn't seen any car on the road, not even emergency lights or a parked van. In short, there was no transport in which those young people could have arrived, but he didn't want to give it too much importance, as there are many dirt tracks and secondary roads in those areas, so he thought perhaps the vehicle was tucked into one of those entrances. Since he didn't want to ask much more about it, he closed the bus door and continued driving. As he moved along the road, my father looked in the rearview mirror from time to time to check on the youths. He says they were all completely silent. Some looked out the window toward the darkness of the woods. Others had their heads down, but no one spoke or moved much. My father says that started to give him a strange feeling because students are normally very noisy when they travel together. However, those 9 young people seemed too calm, as if they were in another world. He even told me that a strange cold began to settle inside the bus, as if the atmosphere had suddenly chilled, which wasn't normal because the engine always kept the interior warm. Still, he tried to ignore that feeling and kept driving calmly. After several minutes, they reached the entrance to the next town. But before entering the place, there is a street that passes right in front of the municipal cemetery, a sight that everyone in the area knows because it looks quite dark and silent at night. When the bus approached that point, the 9 youths stood up from their seats at the same time, and that sudden movement made my father feel a chill. One of the younger ones spoke and said to let them off there at the corner where there was a light pole. My father looked ahead and saw the pole lighting up the street, but he also realized they were right in front of the town cemetery. Still, he stopped the bus and opened the door. The youths began to get off one by one without saying thank you or looking at the driver. They simply walked slowly to the sidewalk as if they already knew exactly where they were going. When the last young man got off, my father closed the door and, about to pull away, felt some curiosity and looked in the rearview mirror to see them. That was when he saw something that left him completely frozen. He says the 9 young people were walking toward the cemetery gate. But what was the problem? The problem was that the gate always remained locked with a padlock at night. And my father knew that because he had been passing by that same place for years during his rounds. Even so, the youths kept walking straight to the gate, and suddenly something happened that he has never been able to explain in any way. He says the young people simply passed through the gate of that cemetery. He says they didn't open it, they didn't jump over it, they didn't make any strange movements. They simply walked and passed through the bars as if they didn't exist. My father says that at that moment he felt a horrible cold that ran down his entire back, as if something had brushed past him from behind. The atmosphere felt so intense that he didn't want to stay there for even a second more. He slammed on the accelerator and left the place as fast as he could, without looking in the rearview mirror even once. That night, my father arrived home very pale and quiet. My mother thought he felt ill, but after dinner he told us everything he had seen on the road. At that moment I didn't know what to think, because I believed that perhaps fatigue had made him see things, but I also knew that my father is not a person who makes up stories. Eventually, we learned that what he really saw was not normal at all, and that it was indeed very strange. Sometime later, my father was at the terminal chatting with other drivers and decided to tell them what had happened that night. When he finished speaking, one of the drivers of that route said he remained silent and then asked him exactly where on the road he had picked up those students. My father explained that it had been at the curve before reaching the next town. Then that man told him something that left us all speechless. That man said that a long time ago, precisely at that curve, a terrible accident had occurred. A van full of high school students lost control on the road and ended up overturning, with 9 young people dying that same afternoon. Their bodies were mourned in the town and then buried in the municipal cemetery, the same cemetery where my father dropped them off. Since then, some drivers who pass by that road very late say they have seen these students waiting for transport at the curve, as if they were trying to go home again, but it being practically impossible because now their home is in the cemetery. My father says he has never seen those students again, but every time he passes that route a little late, he has the fear or feels the sensation that they are watching him, and that is not normal, as he believes those lost souls are still wandering that road. CH family, I remind you that we have new videos every day and live streams every night on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We look forward to you sharing your story. Moving on. Quinta Historias community, I send a greeting to all the listeners of the channel, and I proceed to tell this experience, which, well, is quite disturbing. The story I am going to share happened to my brother-in-law, Ulises, at the time he was a truck driver, which was more or less 12 years ago, a time when he was still driving on the distant roads of Zacatecas. My brother-in-law has always been a very calm man since I've known him, one of those who doesn't scare easily because he has spent years traveling on lonely roads, remote ranches, and towns where you almost don't see a single soul on the streets. The time this happened, my brother-in-law says he was on a route that connected several small villages on the outskirts of Fresnillo, passing through communities like Estación de San Jose, where the roads are quite long, dusty, and surrounded by fields that, at dusk, you can't see anything at all. He always says that area has something strange, because when evening falls, the place becomes too silent, as if the wilderness swallows each and every sound. It's like a zone of silence, but much heavier. That day, Ulises was doing his normal 6 p.m. route, a time when many people were still traveling because many were peasants returning from work or students going home. The bus had several passengers, townspeople, some women with grocery bags, a couple of field workers, and 2 students who were listening to music on their phones, something that was completely normal for the time. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky had that orange color seen in the Zacatecas desert when the day is starting to end. Ulises drove quite calmly, with one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting near the gear shift, looking at the path that snaked between dry lands and wire fences. After passing a long stretch of road where there are practically no houses, Ulises saw something in the distance, something that caught his attention. At the side of the road was a woman flagging down the bus in desperation, moving her arm from one side to the other as if she were in a great hurry. He reduced speed and stopped the bus, thinking perhaps it was someone who had missed public transport and was desperate to get out of there because it was getting dark. But when the woman got on the bus, everyone noticed something strange about her. My brother-in-law says she was very agitated, sweating profusely, with accelerated breathing, as if she had been running for a long time, and in her arms, she was carrying something wrapped in thin blankets. Ulysses looked at her through the mirror and asked her what was wrong, if everything was okay. The woman, with a trembling voice, told him to please move as fast as he could because she was carrying a baby who was burning with fever and needed to get to the hospital as soon as possible. Ulysses, worried, asked her if the baby was her son, but the woman answered something that left several passengers confused. She said no, that the baby wasn't hers. She said that she was walking to catch the bus when, suddenly, she heard a baby crying by the side of the road curiously among some bushes. She thought someone heartless had abandoned it there, so she approached and picked it up to see if it was okay. And when she took it in her arms, she noticed the little one was very hot, with a terrible fever, and that was why she was desperate to take him to a hospital. When the passengers heard that, several began to whisper worriedly because, if what she said was true, then in her arms she was carrying a poor baby in bad condition. Ulysses didn't think much of it and stepped on the accelerator to advance as fast as possible to the next town where he knew there was a clinic. The woman sat 2 seats behind him and began to check the child very carefully, adjusting the blanket and touching his forehead while trying to calm him. For several minutes, the bus moved along the road while everyone stayed attentive to what was happening in the back. The atmosphere inside the bus became tense because, although the engine made noise and the vehicle moved normally, the worry for the baby was more than evident. Some women would turn around from time to time to ask her if the child was doing okay. Ulysses looked in the mirror every so often to ensure everything remained in order, but suddenly something happened that no one expected. From the back of the bus, a heart-wrenching scream was heard, a scream so loud that it made Ulysses break a little from the shock. It was the woman with the baby. The scream was so desperate that several passengers stood up from their seats at the same time. Ulysses turned through the mirror and asked her what had happened. The woman stood up abruptly in the middle of the aisle, trembling and screaming in a way that seemed crazy, because in her hands the baby wrapped in blankets was no longer there. The only thing falling between her fingers was a pile of dark dust, like ash or very fine earth that was crumbling and falling to the floor of the bus. The woman screamed over and over that the child had turned into dust, that the baby she was holding in her arms had turned into dirt. The passengers watched in horror as that gray dust fell from the blanket and accumulated on the floor of the bus. Ulysses braked the bus completely at the side of the road and got up from his seat to approach and see what was happening. When he arrived where that woman was, she was completely in shock, with her hands open and full of that dust that, according to her, was the baby she had found on the road. All the passengers began to talk at the same time, with some saying they had seen the child when the woman boarded, that it was wrapped in the blanket and moving a little. Others claimed to have heard him crying that the baby was indeed as the woman said, that she did have it in her hands, but that now there was no child, only that pile of dark dust on the floor of the bus. The woman cried, saying that she herself had carried it, that she had felt its warm body and its breathing, but suddenly it stopped having weight, and when she looked inside the blanket there was nothing left, only earth. The silence that remained afterward was something my brother-in-law says he will never be able to forget, because no one, not even the lady, could explain what had happened. Outside, the wind moved the dirt of the road, and the sky was already dark over the fields of the Zacatecas road. Ulysses helped the woman sit down and tried to calm her, but she was completely terrified. The passengers were also very nervous because everyone had seen the dust fall from the blanket and no one understood what had happened. As things were getting really ugly, everyone relaxed before they could continue the journey. In the end, they decided to continue to the town so the woman could rest and explain exactly what had happened. But that night, everyone was left with the same unsettling feeling. If the baby had turned into dust in front of everyone, then the child the woman found on the road was never a real baby. Something else was there, something that took the form of a baby to bring someone to carry it. My brother-in-law Ulysses says that on the roads at night, very strange things happen, and he does believe that the woman found a baby that later turned into earth. He does believe that happened, but what he fails to understand is what that baby was, whether it was a mal-air, bad air, or if it was a kind of demonic being that wanted to scare the woman and, in passing, everyone on the bus. If you are enjoying the story, it helps us a lot if you like and subscribe to the channel. If you consider we've earned it, you can also hype our videos so more of the community can hear us. Moving on. Community. I'm not one to tell these things, but I think this is the right time to do so. It is my turn to be the protagonist of one of these stories. For many years, I have been driving a bus, and it was precisely on a night that all of this happened to me, a night where I was driving at late hours. In concrete, this happened around the month of April in the year 2013 or 2014, more or less. A night I was doing a route that connected several small communities in the south of the state, near Hermosillo, passing through stretches that surround the desert area heading toward La Colorada. That is a stretch that I knew well because I had driven it many times. Since I'm not a rookie, I'm someone with more than enough experience. That night, the bus had some passengers, people returning from work or running some errands in the city. It was already night, but the road still had some movement. The sky was clear, without clouds, and the moon illuminated the desert around quite well. I was driving calmly when, suddenly, the bus radio rang with a warning from the transport system. They informed us that several kilometers ahead, a major accident had occurred on the main road. Apparently, a collision between a trailer and a pickup truck had blocked part of the road. They said traffic was stopped and that drivers had two options. 1. Wait in line until the authorities cleared the way. Or 2. Take an alternate route that circles the accident area. I thought it would be better to divert because staying stopped in the middle of the desert for hours with passengers inside wasn't a very good idea either. So when I reached the diversion point, I took the alternate route. That is a path I had passed a couple of times before. It wasn't a main road, but it was also paved and ended up circling the stretch where that accident had occurred. At first, everything seemed very calm. The bus moved with ease, and the passengers were quite relaxed, some even asleep, others looking out the windows at the dark landscape of the desert. But after several minutes, something happened that still makes it hard for me to explain. Suddenly, a very loud noise was heard, like a dry thunder that shook the air. That noise was so loud that, for a moment, I thought something had exploded nearby or that lightning had struck. The sound was so intense that it made the bus windows vibrate. But the strange thing is that when I looked at the sky, there wasn't a single cloud. The sky was completely clear, full of stars. It is here that the strange and disturbing part of the story enters. After that noise, I began to notice strange things. The first was that the road changed. I remembered perfectly that stretch was paved, but suddenly the bus began to move as if it were passing over a dirt road. I looked at the windshield and saw that the pavement had disappeared. In its place, there was only an irregular, dusty path full of stones and ruts, like those left by rains on rural roads. At first, I thought maybe I had taken the wrong route, but when I looked at the hills around, I realized it was the same path I knew, only it looked different, as if it were older or abandoned. As I advanced, the feeling became increasingly strange. The road looked neglected, as if for years no one had repaired it. There was no signage, no lines painted on the ground, nor reflectors on the edges. It was more like a rural trail than a road where cars should circulate. The passengers began to notice it too. Even one approached the front to ask me if we were on the right path. I told him yes, although inside I was already beginning to feel an uneasiness that is difficult to explain. But what finished making me nervous was what began to appear ahead. In the middle of that path, I began to see people walking. That wasn't something completely strange, because sometimes in the ranches, people walk on the road, but when the bus lights illuminated their bodies, I noticed something very strange. The clothing they were wearing wasn't modern clothing. Rather, they dressed in ancient manta clothing, old hats, long skirts, and shirts that seemed taken from another era. Some carried tools or sacks on their shoulders. The most unsettling thing was how they reacted when they saw the bus approaching. They didn't seem annoyed or surprised, as normally happens when a vehicle passes quickly near someone walking. Their faces showed something different, a strange expression, almost of bewilderment, as if they were seeing something completely out of place. I remember perfectly a man who was standing by the side of the road with a ranch hat and very old clothing, who, when he saw the lights of the truck, raised his head and stood staring with a look of disbelief, as if he were seeing a machine he had very rarely seen in the area. It was at that moment when a strange thought crossed my mind. It was as if I were driving along the same path, but years ago, as if I had traveled back years, perhaps 30 or even more. The feeling was so unsettling that I began to feel a lump in my throat from a fear that couldn't be explained in any way. I kept driving because there was no way to turn around on that narrow path, but every meter I advanced felt more unreal. The passengers were also very quiet, looking out the windows at those people walking in silence under the light of the moon. No one said anything, but we all seemed to be thinking the same thing. Something was not right. Then it happened again. Suddenly I heard the same noise as before, a loud rumble like thunder that made the ground and the entire bus vibrate. It was so loud that I felt the steering wheel shake in my hands. For a moment, I thought something had struck the truck, but just after that noise, everything changed again. When I looked ahead, the road was paved again. The white lines on the asphalt appeared, the reflective signs and the poles that marked the modern highway. It was exactly the same road that I had taken at the beginning of the detour. The passengers began to murmur in surprise. Some swore that just a moment ago we were on a dirt road, while others said they had seen people walking and dressed in a way that was not modern at all. I kept driving in silence because I felt a cold that wouldn't go away for anything in the world. Minutes later, we left the alternate route and returned to the main road a little further ahead of the accident, and it was exactly as if nothing had happened. To this day, I cannot explain exactly what happened that night, but every time I remember that dirt path, those people dressed so strangely as if from another era, and that rumble that appeared out of nowhere, it makes me think that for a few minutes, for a few moments, my bus traveled through time and we weren't in the year we should have been, but that we traveled back several decades, even to a time when that road was not yet paved. I ask you, community, what do you think? Was it a glitch in the Matrix, time travel, or just a very strange coincidence? But if you ask me, I did travel in time. Now you tell me what you believe. I have a brother who lives in Tijuana, and every so often I go to visit him. Since I live in Mexicali, it is necessary that I have to pass through one of the most dangerous zones there is in Mexico. I am referring to La Rumorosa. Usually, I always try to travel by day or in the afternoon, since the night has never given me much confidence, and even more in that zone of La Rumorosa, which is one of the most dangerous there is. However, a few months ago, when I went to see my brother for work, I left late and had to make that trip at night. I left around 9 p.m., if I'm not mistaken, on a run that was like any other that day. As soon as the bus left and as it progressed, outside you could see nothing but rocks, curves, and the black void of the hills. Among the people who were also traveling to Tijuana that night, I saw that a few rows ahead of me, a woman was coming with a baby in her arms. The child had been asleep almost the entire trip, calm, without bothering anyone, something very common. I think until at a curve we saw a woman standing on the side of the road. From the moment I saw her, I felt something strange because it was an old woman, one with a black shawl that covered almost her entire head and part of her body. She didn't look desperate, nor did she seem lost. She was just on the road, still, as if she knew the bus was going to pass by her at any moment. The driver lowered the speed and opened the door. I didn't mention this before, but the bus I was on was not a direct travel one. It was one that made stops, picking up passengers at different points on the road, so it was forced to stop in many places, even if we didn't want it to. The woman boarded slowly, without saying hello, without asking anything, and as soon as she set foot inside the bus, the atmosphere changed totally. I don't know how to explain it well, but we all felt it. The air became very heavy, colder, uglier, and a smell of wet earth, smoke, and rotting meat began to spread through the aisle. The old woman walked without haste and, curiously, went to sit behind the lady who was coming with her baby. No one said anything, but several of us followed her with our gaze because, although she didn't seem like it, she caught a lot of attention. And it was then that the child woke up and started to cry in a horrible way. Crying. It wasn't a normal cry. It was a desperate cry, as if he had an appalling pain or as if he were seeing something that we didn't understand yet. The mother began to hug him, to rock him, to speak to him softly, but the baby wouldn't calm down. On the contrary, he cried louder and louder, more scared. The woman in the shawl remained still, but I didn't feel she was looking forward, but rather toward them. In one of the curves, with the light entering strangely through the window, I managed to see a bit of her face, and that was when my blood froze. She didn't look right. She didn't look like a normal old woman's face. It looked sunken, dry, stretched, as if she had the skin stuck to the bone. And the eyes, her eyes were too alive, open very wide, fixed, staring at the woman and her baby. By then, the child's mother also felt something that was more than evident regarding that older woman. It was for that reason that she began to hug her son very tightly. She looked back over her shoulder to see that woman until, suddenly, I noticed she took out a rosary and began to pray. First, she prayed softly, almost between her teeth, but when the child continued to cry and the old woman wouldn't stop looking at him, moreover, I would dare say he started to cry louder, the woman increased her prayers. The passengers who were nearby, especially me, didn't quite understand why the woman was praying. I mean, if her child was crying, the appropriate thing was to try to calm him more with gestures than with prayers, but it didn't take long for us to find the reason why the woman wouldn't stop praying. Suddenly, that old woman let out an ugly groan and then a hoarse voice asking to be let off. Just like that, dryly, to be let off in the middle of nowhere. The driver told her he couldn't stop in the middle of a curve, that she should wait a bit, but the woman demanded it again, but now with more desperation. On the other hand, the mother didn't stop praying for a second. She squeezed the child against her chest and kept praying increasingly firmly. And the more she prayed, the more that old woman became disturbed. When the driver finally found a piece of free land where he could pull over as soon as he opened the door, the woman got off very fast. Moreover, she didn't even turn to look at us. She only moved a few meters away on the side of the road, wrapped in the shawl in the middle of the night. Everyone on the bus kept looking out the window in complete silence. And then something happened that to this day is hard for me to understand. The figure began to lose shape. At first, it seemed like the wind was lifting the shawl, but no. What we saw was how her body was unraveling into a kind of dark, thick smoke, as if a woman had never been there. Rather, it seemed like a black stain in the air of La Rumorosa that the very night ended up swallowing. From among the darkness and the silence of the night, someone said something that made more than one very afraid. It was a witch, someone mentioned. That might sound crazy, of course, but it was strange because at the moment that thing or that witch got off the bus, the child stopped crying. That yes, although the witch got off, her mother never let go of the rosary. She held it so tightly that even her knuckles looked white. When I arrived in Tijuana, I told my brother. He told me that in La Rumorosa there are stories of all kinds, of apparitions and entities seen on the road. So, seeing a witch doesn't sound so crazy. On the contrary, he says that night we were very lucky because the mother's prayers chased the woman away, and that's why that witch didn't do anything to her baby nor to any of us, because we were also exposed. Family, I invite you to be part of the channel members and enjoy all the benefits it has. For example, like seeing your name that is appearing at this moment. Moving on. My father is a bus driver for a very recognized line in the north of Mexico. Because of the time he has in his job, many things have happened to him, and every time I have the opportunity, I ask him to tell me something about his work, because we both share a taste for the paranormal. A few years ago, my father was a bus driver on night routes to the north of Tamaulipas, and he told me that of all the strange things he happened to see on the road, there was one in particular one he has never been able to get out of his head. This happened in the year 2016, on a stretch near Ciudad Mir in Tamaulipas, of those places where, once night falls, you can barely see anything more than the road. It was a normal trip, he says, with few passengers, nothing out of the ordinary. There were some gentlemen, some young people, and some children asleep with the adults. One of those nights when one thinks that the only passenger you can see is sleep and tiredness after a long workday. It all started when they left a part where you could still see some houses and got into a much lonelier stretch. My father first heard a light tap on the side of the bus, something dry as if a stone had bounced against the metal sheet, but he didn't give it importance because he thought some dirt road stone had been kicked up and hit the bus, but then another sound came, and then another. At first he thought they could be branches, trash dragged by the wind, or more little stones kicked up by the tires, but then he noticed something he didn't like at all. The knocks didn't come from below, but from above the bus, at the height of the windows. Furthermore, they had a strange rhythm, as if something were running alongside the bus and at times touching it or hitting it. He tried to keep driving normally without scaring the passengers, but soon one of the young men approached to ask him if he had something stuck on the outside, because they had also heard that same noise. My father told him it was surely nothing, although inside he was already beginning to get nervous. The knocks continued and became clearer. They no longer sounded like something accidental, but as if there were really something accompanying the bus in the darkness. It was then that he dared to take a quick look in the side mirrors. At first, he didn't see anything, just the strip of the black road and the reflection of the bus's own lights. But at that moment, with a change of angle, he managed to distinguish a silhouette. He didn't see it complete, not all at once, but enough to know that it was not normal. That was something long, dark, stuck to the side of the bus, moving at an impossible speed. At times it seemed to run on two legs and look tall, leaning forward, and at other moments, by the way it moved, it seemed to drop down and continue on four limbs. I know clearly that thing was not a dog, it was not a coyote, but it was not a person either. It was something else longer, with jerky but light movements at the same time. My father says the worst thing wasn't the shape, but the naturalness with which it followed the bus, as if for that thing it was easy to accompany them in the middle of the road. It didn't take long for the others to begin to realize it too. By then, the fear had gotten into the whole bus. My father yelled at them not to stand up, to stay in their seats, but the atmosphere was already ruined. Everyone looked from one side to the other, wanting to see and at the same time not wanting to do so. And that thing started to get a little ahead, as if it were testing the bus, and sometimes it stayed at the height of the window. Then it disappeared for a few seconds and appeared again further ahead. On a stretch where the moonlight hit them a little, my father could see that thing better and says it was a tall white silhouette with limbs that were too long. He didn't manage to see its face well, but he saw pale, fixed, ugly, dark eyes. My father accelerated as much as he could, but that thing was still there. At that moment, a gentleman approached the front and asked my father if he knew what that thing was. My father didn't know what to tell him. The gentleman then understood that if no one knew what could be done, it meant that the best thing was to keep driving, because perhaps, and only perhaps, it could be some witch or a demon. To his bad luck, my father says he was far from a town or the city, that it would be a while until he was in a safe place, so to speak. So all he thought about was reaching a small chapel that was a little further ahead on a route near a junction where some truckers usually slow down to cross themselves. It wasn't a big place, only a simple construction with a cross and some candles, but at that moment, anything that meant light or shelter seemed enough. When he finally saw the cross in the distance, he felt some relief, but at the same time he noticed that that thing started to move more desperately. It was no longer just going alongside, but seemed to be on one side and then the other, as if it wanted to surround the bus or prevent it from arriving further. The passengers saw it through different windows, and each person described something different. One said it looked like a standing animal, another swore it had very long arms. A lady said she saw a very high head stuck to the glass, but that, yes, no one saw it complete. Even so, they all saw something very different. Curiously, my father says that while passing right by that chapel he had mentioned before, he honked the horn several times as if trying to scare that thing away. My father says he doesn't know if it was the cross or what it was due to, but right at that moment the bus received a very strong blow in the rear, as if something had crashed against the sheet metal to then stop seeing that thing that was coming behind them. My father clearly didn't brake. He kept driving with his heart racing, hoping that thing would appear again to the side or in front, but it didn't happen anymore. Thus, several very long seconds passed until he dared to look again in the mirror, and this time, he says there was nothing on the road, only normal darkness, as if there had never been anything out there following them. In that way, he didn't want to trust it, and continued until he reached an area with more lights and some houses. That was when he finally could stop. Some passengers got off trembling, others crying, because what he saw, more people also witnessed, and he knows it wasn't a lie. Afterward, they checked the bus and found long marks on the metal, something like deep scratches, too high to have been made by an ordinary animal. My father made the report as always, but no one believed what he said. They told him he surely had seen a big animal and that those scratches were the product of something else. Eventually, my father didn't want to discuss it anymore, but to this day, when he speaks of that night, he always repeats the same thing. He was fully sure that something was running by his side, and whatever it might have been, it was nothing good. If you are enjoying the story, it helps us a lot if you like and subscribe to the channel. If you consider we've earned it, you can also hype our video so more of the community can hear us. Moving on. This happened to me in the year 2020 when I was still driving a bus for work. And although several years have passed, there are nights that I remember that, and it still makes me very angry, not because I don't understand it, but because to this day I still don't know what was really what we saw. My name is Matias Llanos. I am 34 years old, and this happened to me in the year 2023 when, due to work, I had to leave the north area of Mexico City heading to Querétaro. The driver later said that the closest place where we could have been and asked for help was near the Tepozatlan zone in the state of Mexico, and that is why I always locate that story in that site, in that stretch, and you are about to see why I mention this. In that trip, as in hundreds of other trips I had made on the road, I was almost always sitting in the middle of the unit, precisely on the window side. That wasn't a luxury bus, nor was it a piece of junk. It was one of those long-haul trucks that carry people who go from town to town, people who go to work or complete families, tired people who settle however they can and hope to at least sleep a little. That night, the atmosphere was very calm. I don't remember there being music or anything, only the sound of the engine, one or another sigh, and the sound of the windows vibrating with the potholes, and the light on the dashboard, barely managing to illuminate the driver. Among the passengers, there was a girl whom I calculate would have been about 20-something years old, maybe less. She was going alone, wore simple clothing, a baggy sweatshirt, and a small backpack in her hands. From the moment she boarded, she looked very uncomfortable, as if tired or sick, but not anything exaggerated at first. What did catch my attention a bit was that she held her belly a lot, like someone who had a strong pain or a cramp. A lady who was 2 seats ahead asked her if she was okay, and the girl just said yes, that she only felt bad, but that she was already missing little to reach her destination. On the road, one learns not to get much into the lives of others. It was for that reason that matter stayed there. But as the journey progressed, things began to get strange. First, I heard her complain softly, but then they were no longer normal groans. They were cut-off breaths. Those when someone wants to hold in a very strong pain but can no longer do so. The lady who had asked her before approached her again and asked her once more if she was okay. And she did that because the girl was completely bent over with pain in the seat. By then, she was sweating. She ground her teeth and was sweating all over. Among several, they began to tell the driver to stop, that something was wrong with that woman because of the pain she had and her groans were barbaric. The driver looked in the mirror several times, nervous, and in the end he had to pull over on a dark stretch because it was already evident that the girl could not go on like that. I'll be sincere. At that moment, no one thought of anything supernatural or strange. In fact, we all thought the same thing, that the woman was going to have a baby right there. Well, that same young woman shortly after told us that she was pregnant, although it wasn't noticeable because of the baggy sweatshirt. And already in that process, one had to ask for help however we could because, yes, I think that was what was going to happen on the bus. The driver turned on the interior lights, and that made everything feel much worse. Up to that moment, many of us were going in half darkness, that which buffers you from ugly things or from thinking nothing bad. But already with the lights turned on, everything was seen too clearly. The girl's distraught face, the sweat stuck to her neck, her hands clenched, clinging to the seat. 2 ladies approached to help her. One spoke to her very nicely, while the other took out a blanket. Someone offered her water, while another shouted to call an ambulance, but the phone signal didn't catch well there. The driver was pale, not knowing whether to advance or stay there. The girl began to scream much louder, and at first they were normal screams of pain and fear, but little by little they became uglier, deeper, as if they were mixed with another voice. Something that community, I don't know how to explain. Well, it was her screaming, "Ah!" But at moments, something lower, more hoarse was heard, like when 2 sounds come out at the same time through a single mouth. The ladies who were assisting her began to ask for towels, something clean, whatever it was, but no one was prepared for something like that on that bus. One of the men gave his folded jacket, another a piece of paper, and I stayed standing a few meters away, not knowing whether to help or if I was only in the way, with that horrifying sensation that everything was happening too fast. Then came the moment of the birth, or at least that was what we thought. The girl let out a very hard scream, those that pierce you, and suddenly the 2 ladies remained completely silent. That silence of barely 2 or 3 seconds was worse than all the previous screams of the young woman because instead of hearing the cry of a newborn, what was heard was another thing. A short, sharp, animal-like squeal, more similar to that of a pig than that of a child. I saw the ladies' faces before seeing what had come out of that woman, and with that, it was enough for me to feel my body turn cold. The two threw themselves backward at the same time, with their hands bathed in blood, looking at each other with an expression of not knowing what was happening. It wasn't just disgust that was on their faces, it was terror, but the real kind. And at that moment, someone shouted, "What is that?" And then all of us who were nearby leaned in, not too much because there was blood everywhere. I tell you that what I remember I saw with my own eyes. That which came out of the woman was not a baby. What came out of her didn't even have a human shape. It was small, freshly out, damp, covered in blood and other things, but it didn't have the shape one expects. I am going to try to be descriptive without sounding very explicit so you don't have problems with the channel. The head looked very elongated with a cylindrical shape. The skin was dark in some parts, not purple nor black, and also it was stuck as if it were poorly stretched. The child's eyes, that was what made the most impact, because at least in the instant I managed to see it, it already had its eyes open, not half closed, not like a newborn looking for air, but wide open, fixed, but without pupils. And the sound it made wasn't a cry. It was a thin, desperate squeal, almost animal, but with something that didn't resemble anything I had seen before. One of the ladies began to pray immediately, while the other just repeated that this was not right, that this was not right. The girl barely reacted. She was pale, gone, as if not even she knew where she was. The driver, as soon as he saw the people's panic, took a decision that for me was the only and most sensible thing he could do. He closed the door, yelled at everyone to sit down, and started off again, now much faster, looking to arrive as soon as possible at the next town. No one presumed, because no one wanted to stay there standing in the middle of the night with that woman and that thing squealing in the middle of the bus. The road felt eternal, although surely it was just a few minutes. Inside, no one spoke save for the woman who still complained and a lady who, with fear, stayed by her side, while the rest of the passengers, some prayed, others only watched through the windows, while others didn't take their eyes off that woman who had her baby covered with a small blanket. I only remember that I was holding the seat with my stomach turned and an idea stuck in my head. Well, I didn't know if that was really a baby, because I had never seen one like that before in my life. When we finally arrived in an area with lights, the driver almost went directly to look for support. I don't remember if it was a municipal patrol or a unit that was around there, but police did arrive. Then they boarded, saw the girl, saw the mess, the blood, heard several talk at the same time, and immediately took her off to take her to a hospital. And of course they also took the baby wrapped up. I didn't see it at that moment because everything was chaos, but I did hear a policeman say that thing, that baby, was not right, and he sounded like someone who had truly seen something extremely impressive. They took some data, asked us quick questions, and then let us continue, or rather, they got us out of there so we wouldn't continue with that gossip. After that, I didn't know well what happened. Well, as I told you, no one else wanted to touch the subject, and that news never reached the newspapers nor the newscasts, and much less did we know to what hospital they took the woman. In short, there was no more follow-up. Among the passengers, several versions began to run. Some said that surely the product came with a very serious deformity, some syndrome, something medical that the doctors could explain, although we didn't have an answer, although others said no, that wasn't a normal deformity, that the way of moving, the sound, and its eyes didn't correspond to a newborn. There were those who asserted that woman didn't even seem pregnant at first and didn't seem like she was going to give birth. Well, the thing is that many things were said and answers were practically none. The only thing of which I am sure, community, is that night we saw a very strange baby come out of an even stranger woman. To this day, every time I travel, I avoid doing it at night, and when I see a pregnant woman, that which I lived on that occasion always comes to my mind. Community, I ask you, what do you think happened? Is it a baby as such, or was it something else? I read you in the comments. Memo, good night, until next time. Family, I remind you that we have new videos every day and live streams every night on Wednesdays and Saturdays. We look forward to you sharing your story. Moving on. Good night, family. Memo, anonymous, please. This was told to me by a friend of mine who works as a bus driver in the United States for quite some time. He has 13 years in that job, and he says, How strange that there isn't much account of paranormal things that bus drivers suffer here in the United States. But the reality is that they happen, and you see more things than one believes. This happened to him in the year 2018, when in his previous job he was covering Route 50 that passes through Nevada. From what he says, that is one of those roads where there is nothing but desert, low hills, and darkness for kilometers, for which it is a very heavy road, so to speak. That night he says he was going with very few passengers, some 10 or 12 more or less, almost all asleep. The route was going calmly. The engine sounded steady, and outside, you could only see the darkness in part of the road. Everything started when he saw a light in the sky. At first, he thought it was a plane or some very low star, but soon he noticed that that light wasn't moving normally. It would stop dry, go down, go up, move to the side as if it didn't obey any logic. And the worst thing was that, instead of moving away, it started to approach the bus. It didn't take long for the passengers to see it too. One asked if the others were also seeing it. Then the others leaned out, and of course, more than one had their eyes fixed on that light. In a few minutes, half the bus was awake. The light was approaching until it was too high, too bright, as if it were waiting for the moment to go down. And yes, that light. My friend says that thing placed itself on top of the bus, illuminating the road and bathing the roof with clear white light that didn't look like a normal light. At that moment, the truck began to vibrate. The dashboard lights flickered. The radio filled with pure static, and then the first blow was heard above. It was a dry, heavy blow, then another, and then another. They didn't sound like branches nor like something dragged by the wind. They sounded like footsteps, slow footsteps on the metal roof. My friend told me that was when the fear was truly unleashed inside the bus. He barely managed to look out of the corner of his eye and saw some fingers stuck to the edge of the window. He says they were long, thin, gray fingers, too long to be human, while behind them part of a pale, smooth face was insinuated without clear features, as if something were looking for a way to enter and look inside the bus. There he understood that they couldn't stop, because outside was that light, and on top of the bus was what that same light had brought with it. The only thing that occurred to him was to keep driving to an old gas station that was further ahead, a place almost abandoned, but with a few lights and a metal structure over the pumps. While he was driving there, the blows kept moving across the roof as if that thing were trying to climb onto the unit, looking for a way to enter. Although there were people seeing that, and he says there is even a photo of what occurred. At the time, they didn't know what was happening, but the most notorious thing was that light that came down from the sky had brought strange beings that were looking for a way to enter the bus. Luckily, he says he managed to see the gas station, and when they finally arrived, he put the bus under the metal structure. As soon as the truck was covered by the metal roof, he says the steps above began to calm down. They no longer sounded secure, nor did they sound clumsy nor dragged. It was as if these things had stopped or had lost strength. The huge light remained suspended behind, without entering the roof completely. The blows on the roof ceased suddenly, and after a few seconds that everyone felt were eternal, the light began to rise again, slowly at first, then fast, until it was lost again over the desert sky. No one got off the bus immediately because they were afraid of what they saw, knowing it was something paranormal. Luckily, he says that nothing else happened. Only the engine remained vibrating, everyone's breathing very agitated, and the quiet crying of one or another person. Later, already reaching his destination, he reported what he had seen, and after that the unit went for review. However, when they saw the bus roof, they found things somewhat strange. He says there are long, thin dents, as if something with very fine fingers had clung to the metal with great force. Regarding that case, my friend says there are people who took videos and photographs of those things that arrived with that light from the sky. However, he doesn't have any, and although he has tried to find those passengers, he hasn't found them. But he assures that it did happen, and this entire story is completely truthful. If you have a story you wish to share with this pleasant community, I invite you to send it, whether by email or the Facebook page. I would be grateful if you activated all notifications to be up to date with the stories that are uploaded daily. Thank you very much for letting me reach your ears.